David stepped through his front door, suitcase in hand, expecting a quiet reunion with his new wife, Monica. He paused when laughter drifted down the hall, soft, familiar, and utterly wrong. In the next moment, he saw it. Monica, entwined in an embrace with another man. Her laugh that once echoed with affection now felt like a cruel twist. Her touch, once promised only to him, now given freely to someone else. David's voice cracked as the weight of disbelief pressed down on him. "Monica, what is this?" The room snapped silent. The air between them thickened with shame and shock. That moment froze him. Betrayal was no longer a suspicion, no longer whispers in his mind. It was fact, undeniable and raw, staring him down from the very doorway of his own bedroom. Before we go any deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button, so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Would you have walked away silently or stayed to confront them? When David first met Monica, it felt like life had finally given him the happiness he had long been waiting for. He was a man in his late 30s who had worked hard to build a stable life, and in Monica, he thought he had found a partner who would truly appreciate what he had to offer. Their romance moved quickly, faster than many around them expected, and while his friends raised quiet warnings that she seemed too eager to settle into his home and lifestyle, David brushed them aside. To him, Monica represented hope, companionship, and the promise of a family that would heal the loneliness he had carried for so long. Within months, they were married, and David proudly introduced her to his family, convinced he had finally built the foundation of a beautiful future. In the early days, David overlooked Monica's small demands, believing they were natural adjustments in a new marriage. When she asked for costly gifts, he worked extra hours to provide them. When she complained about the long nights he spent at the office, he promised to do better. David's family welcomed her warmly, but Monica often criticized them behind closed doors. She would complain that they lacked sophistication or that their presence interfered with the couple's privacy. David tried to mediate gently, unwilling to confront her too harshly for fear of disrupting the fragile balance in their young marriage. What he did not realize was that his concessions were slowly laying the groundwork for deeper disappointments ahead. Monica's restlessness grew more obvious as the months passed. Her desire for attention became unrelenting, and her dissatisfaction with David's modest but comfortable lifestyle grew sharper. She compared their home to others, suggesting upgrades and purchases that strained David's budget. He began to sense that her admiration for him was fading, replaced by a hunger for more status and recognition than he could provide. Still, he clung to the hope that with enough patience and generosity, Monica would find her happiness by his side. But patience alone could not compete with her growing ambition, and soon, her unhappiness began to show in ways that unsettled David's heart. It was around this time that Daniel appeared, a figure from Monica's past whom she casually introduced as an old friend. Daniel carried himself with an air of arrogance, and while he smiled easily in company, there was a sharpness in his tone whenever he spoke to David. At dinners, Daniel often slipped in remarks that belittled David's work or questioned his choices, masking the insults with laughter. David noticed, but Monica always dismissed his concerns, defending Daniel with quiet whispers about how misunderstood he was, or how long their history of friendship had been. Out of love and perhaps fear of being seen as controlling, David chose to trust her judgment, unaware that his tolerance would come to cost him more than he could ever imagine. Daniel's presence grew more frequent, and with each visit, Monica's admiration for David seemed to lessen. She laughed more freely at Daniel's jokes, sought his opinion on trivial matters, and even used his words to challenge David at home. What David assumed was harmless friendship was in truth a dangerous closeness forming behind his back. Yet, blinded by love, he convinced himself that loyalty and patience would prevail. In reality, he was standing on fragile ground, and with every day that passed, the cracks beneath his marriage widened, setting the stage for the betrayal that would shatter his life. Monica's transformation from the warm and affectionate bride David once adored into a sharp, dismissive partner was not sudden, but rather a slow erosion of respect that David felt every day in his own home. It began with small dismissals, moments where she brushed off his opinions as though they carried no weight. When he spoke about his work, she rolled her eyes and insisted that he did not understand the bigger picture of life. When he offered advice about family matters, she silenced him with a careless laugh as though his voice was unworthy of serious thought. What cut deepest was the way she increasingly placed Daniel's views above his, even in matters that concerned only the two of them. It became clear that Monica no longer saw David as her partner, but as a man to be endured, while Daniel was the one she respected. The change became even more obvious at social gatherings. At a family dinner, where David had hoped to find some relief among the people who loved him, Monica seized the opportunity to belittle him publicly. When David spoke with quiet pride about a recent accomplishment at work, Monica interrupted him with a smirk and said Daniel had once joked that David's job was hardly worthy of praise, that anyone could do what he did. Laughter echoed around the table, and while David forced a weak smile to conceal his pain, his heart sank beneath the weight of humiliation. That night he returned home with Monica, but the silence between them was louder than any insult spoken aloud. She had chosen Daniel's voice over his, and in doing so, stripped David of the dignity a husband should feel in his wife's presence. Outside the walls of their home, the whispers began. Neighbors noticed Monica and Daniel together more often than seemed appropriate. They were seen at cafes, walking through the park, and laughing with the kind of ease usually reserved for couples in love. Some of these murmurs reached David, but he chose silence, convincing himself that trust was the only way to save what remained of his marriage. He ignored the raised eyebrows and sympathetic glances, telling himself that people exaggerated and sought drama where none existed. Yet deep down, he felt the gnawing sense that something was slipping beyond his grasp. That sense became sharper when Monica began telling stories that did not add up. Where she claimed to be meeting a friend, he noticed inconsistencies. Where she promised she had errands to run, small details betrayed her. Still, his heart refused to believe the truth his mind already suspected. The final blow came not in whispers or subtle dismissals, but in words spoken directly to his face, sharp and cold. During one of their arguments, when David pleaded with her to remember the promises they had made to each other, Monica looked at him with disdain and said he was too boring, too predictable, and that Daniel understood her better. Those words cut deeper than any wound. For David, it was not simply an insult to his character, but a declaration that his wife had already chosen another man over him. Everything he had given her, his trust, his home, his devotion, was now dismissed as inadequate. The humiliation of hearing those words from the woman he had built his life around left him hollow. His silence afterward was not weakness, but the silence of a man whose soul had been shaken to its core. By now the audience is left asking themselves, how much can one man endure? How long can David stand in the shadows of Monica's disrespect before he finally confronts the truth she no longer bothers to hide? Each cruel word, each mocking laugh, each stolen moment with Daniel pushed David closer to the edge. And yet, he held on, torn between the love that once bound them together and the growing realization that his marriage was unraveling before his very eyes. The tension was no longer something hidden. It was alive, undeniable, and pressing closer to the inevitable moment of discovery. The moment returned to where it all began. David standing in the doorway, suitcase at his side, his heart pounding in disbelief. The sight before him was not a nightmare he could wake from, but reality itself, cruel and undeniable. Monica froze mid-embrace, her lips still parted in shock while Daniel leaned back slowly, his expression unfazed, almost amused. Silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating. David's voice cracked as he tried to breathe through the storm inside him. Monica, what is this? His words trembled, but his eyes were fierce, burning with a pain she had never seen in him before. Daniel, instead of showing guilt, smirked, as if David's anguish were a performance for his enjoyment. Monica's face drained of color, but she could not move. For David, the betrayal he had suspected in whispers was now carved into stone before his eyes. David's voice grew stronger, breaking the suffocating quiet. "I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me." The words echoed like a verdict, heavy with grief, but also with truth. For a moment, Monica opened her mouth to speak, but no excuse could shield her from the reality he had already witnessed. Daniel, instead of showing restraint, leaned into the moment with arrogance. "Maybe she just needed a real man," he said with a grin that deepened the wound. That single sentence, cruel and reckless, sealed Daniel's downfall. It was not only disrespect, it was a confession, one that would expose him in ways he could not imagine. David's hands shook, not from fear, but from the sheer effort it took to hold back rage. Yet, instead of breaking, he stared at them both with a calm that frightened Monica more than any outburst could have. What Monica and Daniel did not know was that David had not walked into this blindly. For weeks, his heart had told him what his mind did not want to accept. Small lies, missing hours, whispers from neighbors. Each piece had drawn him closer to the truth. Quietly, he had prepared himself. He had spoken with his lawyer, gathered records, collected every inconsistency Monica had tried to hide, messages that contradicted her words, receipts that proved her stories false, and subtle evidence that showed her betrayal was not a mistake, but a choice she had made repeatedly. Daniel believed himself untouchable, and Monica thought David too naive to ever question her. But while they were careless, David had chosen patience. That patience was about to unravel everything they thought they controlled. The silence after Daniel's remark stretched like a blade between them. Monica finally stammered, "David, it's not what it looks like." But even she could not believe her own words. He had seen enough, heard enough, endured enough. What mattered now was no longer her excuses, but the truth he already carried with him. His heart ached, but his resolve was unshaken. David's eyes locked on Daniel, and in that stare was the promise that arrogance would not protect him. He turned to Monica, the woman he had trusted, and saw not the partner he once cherished, but a stranger who had traded love for betrayal. "Do you think Monica and Daniel will get away with this, or has their time finally run out?" David stood in that doorway long enough to realize that anger, if unleashed, would only give Monica and Daniel more power over him. Instead, he turned his back on the scene and chose a path neither of them expected. His revenge would not be a loud explosion of rage, but the steady and deliberate unveiling of truth. Over the following weeks, he quietly organized the evidence he had collected. Every contradictory message, every unexplained purchase, every moment where Monica's words betrayed her actions, he compiled them into a record that could not be denied. When he was ready, David didn't confront her in private. Instead, he laid the truth bare before both families. Gathered in the living room, relatives who had once admired Monica now watched in silence as David shared undeniable proof of her affair with Daniel. Screenshots of messages, financial records, and timelines of her deception stripped away the carefully curated image she had once built. For Monica, humiliation came not in a single moment, but in the collective judgment of those whose respect she craved. David's family, who had once welcomed her warmly, now looked at her with disappointment. Her own relatives, shocked by the depth of her betrayal, could not defend her choices. The community that once admired her grace and charm turned its back, unwilling to stand beside someone who had chosen arrogance over loyalty. Friends who once gathered around her distanced themselves, hesitant to be associated with the scandal. What Monica thought would remain hidden had now become the very thing that defined her, and no amount of excuses could shield her from the consequences. Daniel's downfall was just as swift, though it carried a different weight. David, through careful patience, had uncovered not only the affair, but also Daniel's questionable dealings at work. With the same precision he had used to expose Monica, David brought forward evidence that revealed Daniel's manipulation of colleagues for personal gain. Word spread quickly through Daniel's workplace, where reputation mattered as much as results. Once viewed as confident and ambitious, he was now seen as untrustworthy. His credibility evaporated, and with it, his influence. Contracts slipped through his fingers, colleagues avoided him, and the arrogance he once displayed was replaced by desperation. The man who had mocked David as unworthy now faced the collapse of his own standing, his laughter silenced by the weight of truth. When Monica and Daniel tried to present themselves as a united front, flaunting their so-called freedom, the response was not admiration, but whispers. In public spaces, people looked away. In conversations, their names carried a shadow. What they thought would be a bold new beginning became a partnership built on quicksand. Trust, the very thing they had destroyed in David's life, was absent in their own. Monica questioned Daniel's motives, and Daniel, stripped of his once proud reputation, could no longer provide the life Monica believed she deserved. Their relationship, born from betrayal, began to crumble under the weight of its own weakness. The judgment of others, the loss of respect, and the erosion of trust turned their once confident smiles into looks of unease. Meanwhile, David remained calm, strong, and composed. He chose dignity over chaos, patience over fury. By refusing to lower himself to the same level of cruelty that Monica and Daniel had inflicted upon him, he ensured that their own actions became the instruments of their destruction. His silence spoke louder than any outburst could have. Where Monica and Daniel were unraveling, David was rebuilding. His strength was not in vengeance alone, but in proving that justice often comes without violence, without raised voices, only with truth, time, and the certainty that betrayal cannot sustain itself. And as Monica and Daniel's world collapsed around them, David walked forward with quiet resolve, leaving them to face the consequences of the lives they had chosen. Time has a way of revealing the strength of those who endure hardship, and for David, it became both a test and a teacher. In the months that followed the collapse of his marriage, he poured his energy into the things that remained unshaken: his work, his family, and his own growth as a man. Each day was not without pain, for betrayal leaves scars that cannot be erased overnight, but David chose to let those scars become symbols of survival rather than reminders of defeat. He immersed himself in his responsibilities, found comfort in the loyalty of loved ones who stood firmly by his side, and slowly rebuilt the confidence Monica had tried to strip from him. Where once his evenings had been filled with arguments and doubt, they now became moments of quiet reflection and steady progress. David was not the same man as before. He was stronger, wiser, and more resolute. For Monica, the story unfolded in a far different way. The admiration she once enjoyed, the charm she wielded so easily, and the circle of friends that had celebrated her presence, all of it slipped away in the wake of her choices. People who once welcomed her with smiles now avoided her, unwilling to be associated with the pain she had caused. Invitations ceased, whispers followed her footsteps, and her attempts to defend her actions were met with silence. What she thought would be a bold escape into a new chapter, with Daniel soon became a life marked by isolation. The very attention she had once demanded vanished, replaced by cold shoulders and closed doors. In her heart, Monica began to realize that betrayal may provide a fleeting thrill, but it rarely builds a foundation for lasting happiness. Daniel's downfall was equally sharp. Stripped of credibility at work, his once proud demeanor gave way to desperation. The arrogance that had driven him to mock David now served as a memory of what he had lost. Contracts fell through, opportunities vanished, and colleagues no longer sought his advice. Without the status that had fueled his confidence, Daniel found himself struggling to maintain the life he had once taken for granted. His partnership with Monica, once wrapped in secrecy and thrill, turned into a source of frustration. Their arguments became frequent, and the loyalty they had so easily dismissed in David was absent in their own relationship. What began as an act of defiance crumbled under the weight of mistrust and regret, leaving both Monica and Daniel to face the emptiness they had created. David, however, did not seek their destruction in bitterness. Instead, he allowed their choices to dismantle them naturally, while he walked a different path. In his calmness, he found power. In his patience, he found vindication. And in his silence, he discovered a strength that neither Monica nor Daniel could ever take from him. Standing taller than before, David proved that dignity does not come from avoiding pain, but from choosing not to let pain define one's future. His story became a quiet reminder that true revenge is not in shouting louder or striking harder, but in rising above while those who wronged you are undone by their own actions. In the end, arrogance crumbles, but dignity survives. What Monica and Daniel thought was a victory turned into their downfall. And David? He proved that sometimes silence and patience are the greatest revenge. What would you have done in David's place? Would you have forgiven Monica or walked away forever?